approximately 10,000 square feet. And I've got a lot to tell you today, so I'm excited to be here.
Good. Thank you so much, Lisa. And we have Jeff Vanek, who is Director of Human Resources at Utah's Hogle Zoo. Did I say that right?
That is correct, right. So, and the Hogle family still is involved with the zoo, 4 generations. So we are a medium-sized zoo as far as zoos go in Salt Lake City, situated in Immigration Canyon, in the mouth of the canyon. So a beautiful setting that opens up then to the rest of the Salt Lake City metropolitan area.
Great. All right. Thank you so much. We do have one additional panelist who I believe has been having trouble connecting, and I don't know if he's with us yet. Art Farrell from the Perot Museum of Nature and Science in Dallas. Is Art with us yet? I'm not hearing a voice. All right. Well, we certainly hope Art will be able to join us shortly. So in the meantime, we will continue on. There are, welcome to the panelists, of course, and thank you so much for being part of this. A few things that I want to talk about before we get into the conversation and the questions. This is being recorded. I think most of you probably saw the little blip there a moment ago. This is being recorded so that you can refer to it later. Anyone who has registered for the webinar will be receiving the next museumexpert.org newsletter, and you will have access to the recording through that. We would love to hear from you during the webinar. So a lot of folks are introducing themselves over here in the margin in the chat box. Please do so, and please add your comments and questions. We will have a little time at the end for Q&A. We'll never get to all the questions, but we do want to hear from you. We really consider this to be a co-created experience. And if we can't get to your questions today, I'm going to encourage you to do 2 things. One is to look forward to the next museumexpert.org events, because we have some more in the queue, and we will be addressing some questions there. And also take a look back at the recordings of our previous webinars, because some of the questions that we have already received in advance are already addressed there. We did get some questions from some registrants, and we're so thrilled to have those. Many of those are being incorporated into today's discussion. We can't address everything in one webinar, so do look back on the former webinars and look forward to some new ones too. Last but not least, I would like to acknowledge and thank the team members from museumexpert.org, all of whom are volunteers and doing great work to connect individuals and organizations in the museum field. If you haven't been on museumexpert.org, do check it out. If you haven't registered yet on the site, please consider doing so. It's a really great and growing community, and you're part of it now. So if you're not registered, you might as well get signed up. So with that, I want to remind everyone, especially our panelists, that this is to be conversational, and I'm going to be directing some questions to individuals, but I invite and encourage you all to join in on any questions. So we want some dynamic answers here. So it's going to be more of a conversation than an interview. So you've got to help me with that. All right. Well, we have lots of questions. We have lots of panelists, so we'll get started here. So Horacio, I'm going to actually pose this first question to you. So you have like a 2-second warning here. I think a lot of you know that this is the second in a series of webinars on the post-COVID museum. If I were to sum up the previous webinar in one word, it's versatility. So versatility in terms of museums requiring staff members to be more versatile, to take on more duties, to do more things, and to work in different ways. We've all had to do that in the past year. Versatility too, in terms of needing to adapt to constant and rapid change. So Horacio, do you think this versatility is going to be a lasting change? And how do you see it playing out there at the fleet?
Well, that's a great question. Versatility, flexibility is kind of go hand in hand, and I think it's kind of what we've been trying to have an internal conversation with our staff, and I think it goes beyond that, and it applies for everyone from our CEO to everybody else. I think it's you know, we have, for example, as we've reopened, it's going to be an all deck on hands kind of approach. It's just going to be what we're going to be facing for the next couple of months, if not years, for sure. So I think it's also very important, and as we found out through this process, is we need to be very open and transparent with our staff, that things will be challenging, things will be tough for the next couple of years. I think they appreciate that. And often as leaders, we try to kind of always be on the positive side, but it's also important to kind of show that vulnerability and be able to be open about how things will be challenging in the next, a couple of years. And then also as leaders, not be afraid to just get our hands dirty. We had examples as we reopened. We had to go down to the cafe and bus tables and things like that. So staff appreciate that you doing that with them, and everybody rallies around that. So flexibility applies to everybody, not just the staff we want to hire, but also for the people who were able to maintain the job, to be able to really show and lead by example.
Yeah, excellent, excellent. So Lisa, I want to come to you next, because you're from a very different kind of museum environment than Horatio. So talk a little bit about how this versatility and to some extent having a smaller staff has played out there at Kidzoo.
Sure. So I know that, Rita, you had used the word versatility, or that had come up a lot during the previous webinar. And I would echo what Horatio just said about flexibility. And to me, that sort of denotes an openness to putting the organization ahead of your ideas or needs or professional expertise. And really nowhere more so have we than this past year have we all been challenged to really hone our flexibility and to look at from a sustainability standpoint, to really look at the needs of the entire organization. So I think that going forward, I think that's only going to increase. I think certainly, I think with this past year, we here at Kidzoo, though we're a small organization, we've always had to be flexible, right? Because we're always trying to cover more bases than we have, players to cover. But I think what we're looking for going forward and coming out of this pandemic is really outward facing thinkers. And the entire museum world, I think, is shifting to a much more responsive and fluid relationship with the community that it serves. And so, we're stressing that with our staff, and once we're in a position to be able to add to the organization, I certainly am looking for people that understand that of course have a curiosity and a good, sensibility and flexibility, but outward facing is going to be extremely important. Yes, and as we go forward.
Excellent. That is so interesting. So Chuck, I want to come to you because you're also from a small museum, one that's fairly isolated geographically. And I know you and I talked a few weeks ago, you talked about this sort of sense of the needs of your community and this and looking for something differently, because the whole world was different in 2020. So talk about how this is happening here at the castle.
Yeah, for sure. And I would echo what Lisa and Horatio said about flexibility is going to be the watchword, and it's here to stay when what you're looking for. And I actually think in some ways, those of us that are at smaller museums and the teams that work for us we're at a little bit of an advantage when the pandemic hit because of that, because when you're at a small museum, it's already baked in. Nobody has one single responsibility. Everybody does a little bit of everything. So it wasn't as big of a shift for us. And I would say, we've talked, and I think there's a question later on that we're going to dive even deeper on, but if people are looking for how to get back into the field, I would say don't discount the small museums. Lisa and I have both talked before about how we kind of view ourselves as the staging ground for that next future workforce of museums, you know. And if you want to really get your hands dirty in a lot of different areas and find out what it is that you actually love about working at a museum, a small place is a great way to do that. And I've certainly seen that with my team on the ground here. You know, everybody's pulling together. People are trying new things. Today, one of my director level people is running the gift shop because we had a call off. So you see that, and I think as we're pulling in new staff as we start to recover more and more from the pandemic, finding people that have that kind of teamwork mentality and are willing to respond to the needs of your visitors, whatever they may be. You know, like here at the castle, we sit on 135 acres of land that we own and manage, and we're surrounded by 5,500 acres of wilderness. So when Rita says that we are isolated, she's not joking. We're literally on top of a mountain. But we found during the pandemic that that was actually a huge asset, because our community needed a safe place with outdoor space where they could spread out and still be connected in some way with the history of the community or with the people that they know. Like, you can take a hike through our woods and be totally socially distanced the whole time. So that was a benefit for us. So I think in addition to staff flexibility, I think people who are able to think outside the box and really look at ways that the museum can be more flexible in the way it presents itself to the community is also another asset that I would push people to focus on if they're thinking about how to make themselves more attractive as a candidate in the future.
Okay, very good, very good. And so, so I'm gonna shift to, I think our fifth panelist has joined us, and he is Art Farrell, Vice President of Human Resources at the Perot Museum of Nature and Science in Dallas. And Art, if you have caught your breath and are connected, give us the 20-second description of the Perot Museum, and then tell us a little bit about this sense of versatility playing out at the Perot. So Art, are you with us?
I am with you, Rita. Thank you so much. And I have caught my breath. The Perot Museum is located in Dallas, Texas. We are in the center city. We are a mid-sized museum focused on nature and science. And, you know, I welcome this opportunity to discuss versatility, because I think it's the operative term that we've all found ourselves in. You know, pre-COVID, March 13th, I think all of us shut down and tried to determine how best we were going to operate. And then for the last year and a half, we've been operating as best we could in a limited capacity. We came back in September at a reduced approach, opening Thursday through Sunday, bringing individuals into the museum, but it required us to look at what we would do differently, because we also had to reduce, unfortunately, 60% of our workforce as a result of COVID. So the individuals who came back not only having to perform the roles that they were doing pre-COVID, but we needed them to be able to do other things in order for the museum to function. So it required individuals to be open to understanding where we were going, not where we had been, but it also required the museum to be able to provide training for them. We literally had to step into changing job descriptions for individuals. And front-facing guest services folks, for example, had to do a lot more than what they were doing before, our event hosts. So we've had to be versatile in terms of looking for the right talent to come in, preparing the individuals who are in place to be able to function in the roles that we needed today, literally building the plane as we are flying the plane.
Yes, I think many of us are getting quite good at that, and none of us have crashed yet, so that's a good thing. I'm so glad, Art, that you mentioned the job descriptions, because that's something in today that you know, with things that are sort of so big to think about, is really getting to some of these concrete examples. And can you, or in as much as you can you share something maybe a little bit more specific about a job description that changed in the past year to represent this idea that we're talking about?
I will. I mean, as we begin to look at how we would best function in our area of education and learning, we have a position that's focused on community. And so we really just looked at that description to really understand what impact we needed. So we changed the job description to focus on building grassroots partnerships through relationships, being able to understand the key constituencies and what it would take to begin to help those individuals serve as ambassadors. And so where that position before may have been focused more on a broader educational approach, we're being more laser focused but broad at the same time. So I think that would help. As I look at a more grassroots, front of the line, front of the house position, our guest services position was a job that an individual would greet an individual within the museum, work just in a particular space at an exhibit. And now we may need that individual to be able to function and move from an exhibit to move to the box office, to move to ticketing, and just being fungible, if you will. And so putting together a job description that allows an individual to see transferable skills that they may have had outside of the museum and who would apply for that role, and not limit us to just individuals who've been in the museum. So Rita, I hope that helps in answering the question.
Wow, there's so much there to unpack. So I think you just laid the groundwork for the rest of for the next hour and 20 minutes. So thank you for that. And I want to say there were a couple of things I heard in there that I want to comment on and kind of segue to the next questions. One is you mentioned about community and literally changing job descriptions to have this focus on community. And that echoes something that Lisa said a while ago, which is this needing to be more outward facing. I mean, I think museums always have been, but it's somehow different now. And to see that starting to manifest itself in something like a new job description is really interesting. The other thing that you said was, I think you talked a little bit about training. And so one of the things I'm very curious about is how your museums are supporting the staff with these changes. There's a lot of transition going on. Everyone in the world has been under stress in the past year. So how are you supporting the team? Is it training? Is it something else? And Horacio, I think you mentioned something about this when we talked a week or two ago. So I want to start with you, and then I'm going to flip around a bit.
I think for us, it's been a lot of listening. As people come back, for the people who stay with us and for the people who were furloughed coming back, it's really, we keep using the word empathy, and because it's not just about coming back to work. It's people coming back from a very tragic months of a lot of stress, a lot of even personal loss. So it was not necessarily trying to get people to just get back to work, but just welcome people. And that, and our staff is our internal community. And we kind of look, when we talk about community, we have our external community, we have our internal community. There's a lot of work that goes into our external community, the people who we serve and our visitors, our school programs, but we also can't lose track of or the importance of our internal community that is our staff. So there's a lot of conversations about, let's first try to welcome people back. We put a lot of emphasis into doing a welcome back event, and just be there for our staff coming back. And then we can work through all the other things, because it's important to just not go back to normal. There's not going to be no normal. It's going to be different, and that's okay. We need to embrace that as an organization. And that was important for our staff to kind of hear that we're just happy to be back. And then we can work through all the other things that will come along in terms of what's going to happen next. So it's just that welcome back event. It was very important for our staff. That felt really appreciated. And for us to continue to stay focused on our internal community, which is our staff. Our organizations can function, and they're nothing without our staff. And we just need to always keep that in mind. And if we have that focus, then people definitely appreciate that. And they're just ready to go once they go through those transition periods.
Okay, all right. So Jeff, I want to turn to you next. Thanks for your patience. I'm curious to know at the zoo, which again is very different from the places our other panelists are representing here. How is this versatility happening at a zoo? Because, and one of the reasons I really want to point this question to you is, I imagine in a zoo setting, there has to still be some specialists. You know, I can work the front desk, but you do not want me in animal care. So talk to us a little bit about what's going on at the zoo and what has changed and what hasn't.
Sure. Yeah, great question. Thanks, Rita. So at the zoo, we do have specialization for sure when it comes to the animals. And unlike a museum, you know, we can't close the doors and walk away for a while because the animals still need to be fed and stalls still need to be mucked out and all kinds of things. We have a living stock that has to be cared for constantly. But to your question, even though all of that needs to happen, we also have experienced some generalization in a way. I've done a lot of things that I've never done before. I've learned how to prepare food for drafts and to feed them, to set up draft feed demonstrations, you know, pretty different than human resources work. But we've all had to pitch in to do these things because we've had to, like many of other institutions for a while had to close our doors and we had to do layoffs. And so then in looking on bringing people back, what kind of people were we going to be bringing back and what would that position look like? And in some cases that looked like a temporary position with the opportunity perhaps of becoming a permanent position. We did that with our keeper staff specifically is one area where I think about it. So even though we needed that specialty, we were still bringing in people on a temporary basis with the idea that as we began to open and the public began to come back, our gate ticket sales began to increase again, and the need began to increase again for additional staff, that we would move people from a temporary position then into a more permanent position. So that's one of the things that we did and have been and still are doing here at Hogle Zoo for sure. I'd also like to make a comment on the discussion that was going about mission. And it always makes me think of a story because it's very relevant here. And this story probably honestly isn't true, but it makes a really, really good point. and the story is that in the 60s when NASA was, you know, preparing to send a man to the moon for the first time, there was a consultant there at NASA, and he goes into the restroom and there's a custodian, and the custodian is, you know, cleaning up in the restroom, and the consultant turns to the custodian and says, you know, what is your job here? And the custodian replies, to put a man on the moon. And you know that, and so we have really focused on our mission. So regardless of what anybody's doing here at the zoo, we've had to really refocus and say, you know what, you may have certain responsibilities and you may have certain job titles, you may have certain things you were hired for, but your job here is our mission. And so however we need to make that mission happen, however you need to help and make that contribution, be a part of that mission. And to that end, we've actually changed job description to script, the title, not the titles, but in the job description, we tell people that, you know, one of the things that you'll be doing is, for us, we create champions for wildlife. That's our mission. And so in our job description, we tell people right up front before they even apply and they see the job description, one of the things you'll be is a champion for wildlife. And then we've created interview manuals, interview manual for our supervisors and directors that talk about how do you interview for the skills, right? There are certain skills that are needed for sure in any job, but then how do you interview for the second thing we're really looking for is a champion for wildlife. And what does that look like? And how do you interview for that part of the job? And that's as important, if sometimes not more important for us. And so those are some of the things that we've been doing.
That way, great story.
Wow. Some of those questions weren't used. Yeah. Wow.
So
what they ask? Or...
They asked primarily about my resume and some of my design experience.
Hello? Okay, there. Thank you. Hi. So that was a great story. I love it. I hope it's true about the NASA person. I want to, so I'm going to ask a question that is really direct and kind of naive. So here I am. I've worked. I have lots of work experience. I've never worked in a zoo. I have a cat, so I love animals. Would somebody like me who's never worked with animals be able to interview for a job at a place where part of the requirement is to be this champion for animals? You're
So
not you're not trying to narrow where your folks are coming from. I know you're not. So talk a little bit about that.
yeah, so first of all, it depends on what you're applying for. So that makes a big difference. If you're
Not a
applying for If you're applying for a keeper position, then, and you really want to become a keeper and you have no experience being a keeper, then what I'm going to recommend to you is that you look at our volunteer program. And so you start out gaining your experience with specifically zoo-related animals as a volunteer, and that you build your experience and your background with that. But to your question though, regardless of what position you're hiring for, a champion for wildlife, that's our mission. We're about conservation. We're about making sure that there is wildlife in our future and that the habitat still exists. And so it doesn't really matter if you are working directly with an animal or not. Everything you do here at the zoo is towards that mission. So even though I'm in human resources and I deal with a different kind of animal called people, conservation is a people issue when it comes down to it, as much as dealing with the animals and the environment. The reason why we're dealing with animals and the environment is because we've got people interacting with the animals and the environment, and sometimes in ways that are harming both, and hopefully in ways that are preserving and conserving, and hopefully creating environments where some species can begin to thrive once again. So it doesn't really matter. Our mission covers all those jobs because we all play a part in it. Somebody in finance might ask the same question: How am I a champion for wildlife? How do I, bring the mission of the zoo forward? Well, obviously, you can't run without money. You can't run without the accounting. We can't run without paying people. And in our institution, payroll is out of finance. So all of those contribute, and it's helping people to see the connections, and so that they can connect to something bigger than just the specific job they might do when they come into the zoo. And then we offer additional opportunities to actually connect more directly for all employees in some of those things that are more directly mission related as well.
Right.
In addition to the things we might have hired them for, we also give them opportunities to participate in some of those other things as well.
Yeah, great. And I'm so glad we had this conversation, because we heard a lot about mission in the first webinar in this. When the world seemed to be closing down and cutting to the core, what's core? It's mission. So I so appreciate hearing that.
Rita, can I add something to that too? Yeah, I think for the people that are still looking for a role, I think that this really illustrates a point, which is I think a lot of museum people get into a specific kind of museum and then assume that that's the only type of museum their career will ever take them to. And I would encourage people to not think like that. If you'd have told me 8 years ago, when I had been working for more than a decade at a huge science center, that I'd be running a historic house, I'd have laughed at you. There's no way. But here I am. And I think that we don't often give ourselves credit for how transferable museum skills are. And that's true between types of museums. I think it's also true between museums and the private sector, or museums and other nonprofit work. But I think, it's our job as the people who are leading museums to help our staff understand that their growth is going to help them to deliver on our mission, but especially for people who are younger and kind of working their way through into whatever their career might be, that the skills they're building in a museum can help them build a career in a multitude of pathways. Just because you start working at a science center doesn't mean that you're always going to work at a science center. Just because you've worked at an art museum doesn't mean that you're shut out of zoos or whatever it might be. So I think that's a key takeaway as the entire museum field is recovering from COVID. Some of us lost people because of finances, some of us lost people because of the virus, some of us lost people because of they decided to move on to something new. As we're looking to bring new people in, casting that wide net and accepting that experience in a lot of different realms can be applicable in the mission related work that we're advocating for is really important, I think.
Yeah, great. And we're sort of back to versatility, but I want to continue on with something maybe a little bit more specific, and that is skill sets. We've talked a little bit about specialists, we've talked about mission, we've talked about transferable skills, but let's just say here it is today, and today is different from last week and certainly different from a year ago. What skill sets, what attributes are you looking for? Be as specific as you can in your hiring as you rehire or hire for new merged positions. Art, I'm gonna pick on you. You're right there at the heart of it as a human resources person. What are the kind of skill sets that the Perot Museum is looking for?
And so in answering that question, I think that I'm probably also a good example in that my experience is not museum experience. And in September, I was hired at the Perot Museum. And I think that a large part, I brought a body of knowledge and experience in human resources that the museum needed at that particular time. And so in answering the question, I think that it's really going to depend upon what the specific position is that you're recruiting for. It may be a specific need that you have, and in terms of those skills, you might have a broader net to look at individuals outside of the museum. So having shared that, there are certain competencies that I think that are important. And I think that part of it is having a business acumen. While we are museums, we still have to operate, even if we're not for profit, we have to be able to operate and be good stewards of the funds and responsibilities. So understanding how business operates and understanding how museums operate are going to be critically important. Effective communication skills, being able to communicate in a way that you are listening and hear others, but also that you can be heard. Being collaborative, having the ability to work together. Those things that we learned in kindergarten in the sandbox still play true today. Can I work through and get results through others? I think those are critical things that we look at as we hire individuals to come aboard.
Yeah, thank you, Art, and thank you for sharing your story that you're relatively new to the museum world. And so I am curious to hear from our other panelists who have been in the museum world perhaps a bit longer. Do you have any other things you'd like to add to this notion of the competencies or skill sets or attributes and how it has perhaps changed? So Lisa, you have something to say.
I do. I do. I've been in the museum world now for more than I want to reveal on this call. I don't want everyone to start doing the math, but it's been many, 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 many years. But I did not start off thinking, oh my goodness, I want to grow up to be a museum professional. That was not what my career path in my mind was. I was an actor, and that's what I want. I had no formal museum training whatsoever. And yet decades later, here I am, right? So I kind of, I would use myself as an example in that there are certain attributes, as you said, Rita, that I think are that draw certain people to this field. And I think now more so than ever, as we've all been through this year, and this year has, again, I don't want to make a sweeping generalization, but I think we've all learned things from this year. We've learned about our organizations, we have learned about our community, and we've learned about sustainability. And I think the attributes that are necessary for museum success, as well as personal fulfillment within an environment such as a museum, are those things that I would certainly like to see reflected in in a cover letter or in a resume, tell me about your curiosity about the world. Tell me about your interest, your ability to think outside the box, and your ability to understand or have an interest in the needs of the community that the museum serves. Again, I go back to that. It's not a matter of, and I'm looking at the chat, and I've, in reflecting what some of the questions are already in the chat, and it's not not a matter, at least in my mind, of adding more responsibility. That's not what flexibility means in my mind. In my mind, flexibility means being open to change and and feeling comfortable in an environment that is always changing and adapting and being responsive. It's a mindset, and that's yes, you have to hire for certain skills. We have to have payroll, so someone has to know how to do accounting to make sure that that happens. And those are hard skills. But overall, you're going to need you're going to have to demonstrate what are those soft skills that coming out of this pandemic are going to be essential. And certainly for us as an organization, we thought we knew our community, and a lot of things have been proven true, but you've got to be open to change, and you have to be open to letting go of preconceived notions and being willing to listen and really hear what others are saying back to you, if that makes sense. So however you qualify that kind of attribute, I think that is primarily essential going forward.
Yeah, I think Art said earlier, it's not, it is where we are going, not where we've been.
Yeah, I love what Lisa said, and I think there's also, because with the workforce, and these I call these time true principles. If you're looking for a job in an institution, you're bringing a certain skill set and who you are to that. And you're bringing your hopes and aspirations as well as a candidate. You're hoping for a certain thing in your career, you're hoping for a certain thing in your professional development. But what makes a candidate most attractive to the organization itself, and when I look at a candidate, is when I know that candidate is asking themselves the question, what can I do for this organization? What can I do for them? What can I bring? What of who I am can I bring to the table to make this organization better, to do something, whatever they're hiring for, in a better way that helps them move their mission along, that helps the organization move those things along that the organization is trying to accomplish. When I get a candidate like that, you know what? If some of their skills aren't quite up to par, or there's some things missing, I'm gonna give that candidate serious consideration anyway. And they may very well be the one I hire over somebody who has that good package. When I get that attitude of I want to serve, and I'm coming to you to help you do your job, to help your organization be what you are trying to be, that candidate is the attractive candidate over even the more qualified candidate in terms of those hard skills.
Yeah, I agree totally.
Yeah. Horacio, Chuck, do either of you want to weigh in on this?
Yeah, I was just going to add that, one of the things that we've gone through, even before, obviously, the hiring process and looking at skill sets and what you're looking for, there's a lot of work that needs to be done with organization by DEI in understanding the makeup of your organization. How are we? Do we reflect our community? So there's obviously a lot of work about who we want, skill sets that we're looking for, but let's also keep in mind there's a lot of DEI work that needs to happen, especially in the museum field, and we need to be mindful of how are we as an organization, what's the makeup of our organization, and who we're looking for, and if that's important as we go out there and kind of look for those candidates, keeping that in mind, that the internal community reflects our external community, because in San Diego we are a very diverse community. So if our internal community doesn't reflect the external community, then something's not aligning. So we just have to be mindful, not only what you're looking for in terms of skill sets, but who the people you want to bring to the organization that actually reflects or are in our part of your community.
Great. Chuck, did you want to weigh in?
Yeah, I mean, I think the other panelists really hit everything. The one other skill that I would say is something I'm always looking for, and this goes back to the connection with the community as well, I think, is somebody who can demonstrate their ability to listen and collaborate. I love it when people show up and they have a whole bunch of ideas, but I also want to see them give me an example of a time when they had an idea and someone else had a better idea and they adjusted. Especially on a small team, you have to all be rowing in the same direction. It does not take much of one person going off in the wrong direction to upset everything in a small setting for sure. So I think other than the things that everyone else has already said, a demonstrated ability to listen and collaborate would be another like skill set that I'm looking for when I'm hiring staff members too.
Yeah, I think that's so interesting because we've heard for years good communication skills. So what does that mean? And you just said it, Chuck, and Art said it earlier, which is the collaboration. It's the ability and willingness to listen.
Mhm.
And Art said something which I thought was quite brilliant, and I had to write it down. It might even go in a sticky note, so it's really important. It's the know how to be heard is a communication skill. And I think that is so interesting and so brilliant. So thank you for all that. I'm going to take this line of questioning a little bit, maybe a little bit narrower. I don't know if it's narrow or not, but we've heard about versatility. We've heard about flexibility. We know there's still some room for specialization. We're hearing, these so-called soft skills, the competencies on communication, the curiosity, the connection to mission, how to present oneself. I'm wondering in this very interesting and challenging time, how museums, are making decisions on things like part-time versus full-time, temporary versus permanent, staff versus contractor. These are all choices, and it feels like it's pretty fluid right now. So I'd like to hear from each of you. What are some of the things that inform how you make those decisions on part-time, temporary, full-time, contractor, staff, and how do you see it going forward? We have today, and then we have a year from now. So Jeff, I'm going to start with you because I think you brought this up first.
Okay, so a lot of our decision making is economic. What can we do given what's coming in terms of revenue? And what does that look like in terms of staffing? Another part of that is also in terms of demand. So up until last year, which everybody can just kind of erase, we would see over 1 million visitors to the zoo every year, over 1 million. Last year that wasn't the case, obviously, but things are starting to ramp up again now, and people that post-pandemic, I'm finally can get out of the house, I can finally go somewhere. And because we have that open indoor environment, we are attracting more and more people. And with that, we're also having the demand. I can only go do so many draft feeds before I really have to start doing, human resources work again, because we're starting to hire the people, whether they're seasonal or whether they're permanent positions, and all that's starting to come back on. And so it's that tension between what is the revenues coming in and what are the needs to continue to support the operations of the zoo in our case.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Horatio?
Yeah, I think obviously the question is, and I know we had a conversation before about a lot of things depend on your location. California is a pretty tricky location too. So when the conversation, when it comes to staff versus independent contractor, it's kind of really, it's hard to really justify getting someone as an independent contractor in California. So you have to be very mindful of some of the legal pitfalls of some of those things, of course. But it's going to be, for us, as we contracted quite a bit and we're trying to restaff, we are going to having this conversation about, and I know it's been in the chat about the staff that we have in compensation, and it's a tricky conversation. It's a tough conversation because it is important to have it, but it will take months, for that to take on in terms of what does that mean internally? As yes, economics play a big role in revenues and expenses, and some of the challenges nonprofits have. But how, if we want to attract talent, and whether it's part-time or full-time, what can we do in terms of compensation? It's a very tough conversation, and I don't think there's any easy answers. But I'm glad to see it be part of the chat because it's going to have to continue. I know museum experts probably will have further conversations about it because it needs to come along, especially as it relates to even as basic as do we want to put salaries on job openings. I think we should. I mean, I think that, again, that's my personal opinion. So there's obviously, as we look at the makeup of what our staff will be in the future, there's a lot of components we need to be mindful of. And we are going through the process of renewing benefits. Benefits for small organizations are very tough. It's very hard to continue to provide very robust health benefits, which nonprofits tend to always done good because they can pay well on salary. Well, that's starting to kind of not work well. So anyway, this is my rambling thoughts on that.
Well, thank you. They're not nearly as rambling to my ears as they were to yours, but Art, because you're a human resources professional, I'm very interested to know your take on this, or your reaction to what Jeff and Horacio have shared.
So I'll align with Jeff and share that our budget will dictate to a great extent what we're capable and able to do. But we also utilize a lot of seasonal staffing in that we're headed into summer. What we have found is now coming out of COVID, summer camps are up and individuals are eager to come to the museum. And so we have hired seasonal individuals who will be working at the museum through Labor Day in part-time shifts for those roles. They have a sunrise and sunset, and so our opportunity is to bring those individuals in. And what we have been able to do, with the exception of last summer, is to have individuals who are looking forward to applying and working in that particular space. We have used some limited contract work in that we have a special need and we have a need for a specific targeted talent to come in. And so we're able, based on that particular project, to bring contract work in. But as Horacio has shared, one of the things that we're looking at is how do we create a value add for the individuals who work for us. So I'm looking at our benefits package and really surveying our staff to recognize if our benefits are of value to them. What things can we provide to part-time staff that would also mirror what we're doing for full-time staff and do it at a price point that makes sense for the museum, allowing us not only to attract part-time individuals, but to retain them as well. And so we're just really trying to look at what makes sense, because we are not going to be staffing to the levels that we were pre-COVID. So it gives us a bit of bandwidth to be able to look at how we can create value for the individuals who work for us, begin to attract the talent that has the skill set to work. And I think it was Lisa who talked about curiosity, just having individuals who are extremely curious and looking at how they can take their talents and put them to work for the museum by understanding our mission and how they can apply those skill sets in a way that adds value to the museum. So largely what Jeff and Horacio has said is what we're spending our time right now.
Okay, this raises actually brings up a question that came to us through the registration, and something a lot of organizations, not just museums, are talking about is this sort of different work-life balance or blend, post-COVID, and can I still work remotely? A zookeeper, probably not, but I know, Chuck, don't you have an example of some changes you've made
Mhm.
with remote working and some things? Tell us that story.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually have two examples. And I think, your original question was who's helping to drive this conversation about how jobs change. And I think in our world, one of the places it came from was from the employees themselves. So I have a staff member who does our marketing work. And she had a baby 3 months before the end of 2019 and came off of maternity leave as the pandemic was starting. So, it was helpful to be able to switch to remote for her. And it became clear really early on that she was enjoying being home with the baby. And she came to us and basically tendered her resignation, thinking we were going to require her to come back to the office. And we actually adjusted her job description and made it an entirely work from home position, so that she could continue to contribute, because she's a hugely valued member of our team. She has a great skill set, but she also could take care of her family. So that was one example that has worked really well for us. It certainly won't work for every position. You need an interpreter in the museum to answer questions, but for marketing, I think that's another one. The other thing that we did, when the pandemic hit, we actually had an open job search going for a director of development. And one of the cost saving measures we took was to eliminate that position from the budget before we hired anyone. And so we needed to come up with some kind of plan to handle fundraising without a director of development. We'd never had one before. We were about to embark on this next phase of our evolution. And then the pandemic, of course, happened. So I found a consultant who is in New Hampshire, but on the other side of the state. So he's about an hour away. And he works almost entirely remotely as well. He helped us with our database. We switched databases and set up. And he's now supporting my work as kind of the chief development officer, as the executive director, and supporting the rest of the team. So we talked during our kind of prep meeting about this, around this idea of specialization versus generalization. And I mentioned the one place where we have really completely democratized the process in our museum is in fundraising. We have, myself and the board who are involved in kind of major positions, talking with major donors, that kind of thing. But our frontline staff is also, we tell them all during training, you are part of the fundraising team, just like you're part of the custodial team and you're part of the customer service team. And a few of our education staffers actually took that to heart during the pandemic, and they came to us with the idea for a new fundraiser. At a zoo, you can adopt an animal and help to fund their care. Why can't you do that with an artifact or an exhibit at a museum? So my education team created the idea of Adopt an Artifact at the castle as a way to raise some extra money. They came to us with a complete plan. I took it to the board and said, I think this is a home run, let's do it. And we implemented it. And we were really happy because it was validated that good ideas can come from anywhere, when the Wall Street Journal featured that program in an article about creative fundraising at museums during the pandemic. Tiny little museum on top of a mountain in New Hampshire does not get coverage in the Wall Street Journal very often. So it was really fun for me to be able to bring that to the board and bring it back to my staff and say, see the work you did, it helped us move our mission forward. So I think, trusting the creativity of your staff when you're thinking about new ways of doing things is a huge benefit for museum leadership, to think about how work can be organized differently.
I love that story, and not just Wall Street Journal, but positive story in the Wall Street Journal.
Right.
It's like that old saying, if 60 Minutes knocks on your door, it's never good news, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I have a question I really want to ask here, and it's a little bit of a squishy question. So not everyone's comfortable with this. So I'll let you all do what you want. But I want to think about, like, what is the museum workforce writ large going to look like in, say, 5 years? It's changing daily right now, but like 5 years, what will it look like, or what do you want it to look like? So sort of trying to bring all of these things we've talked about, what's your dream team in 5 years? And do you think we can get there? And I see you're all thinking. And Lisa, we haven't heard from you in a minute. Would you like to take a crack at this?
Well, as you said that, just now, Rita, it reminded me, and maybe, gosh, I'm being very candid, just between me and the 51 other people on the call today. But I remember 20 years ago, some director that I worked for, I can't remember what the project I was doing was, but I remember her in an elevated voice telling me that we're not a social service agency. Okay, flash forward 2021. And when I think about all of the activities that we, at least at Kidzu, have been engaged in this past year, we are very aligned with our social service community in terms of providing access, in terms of, really a concerted effort to reach others who are non-traditional museum visitors, et cetera, meeting people where they were, understanding the limitations of broadband access, et cetera, et cetera. So when I think of how would I see the museum 5 years from now? I think, again, I go back to this. I just feel like there's been this seismic shift, at least. And again, we're a small museum. So I know I started off at the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago. So I understand big museums, and I know that the fluidity and the flexibility is sometimes easier within a small environment. But I think when I look about 5 years from now, I think about museums are much more fluid in terms of the community, about the museum being responsive to the community. So it's the community that's driving how the museum functions and what it is that it's providing. Much more so than, we are the experts and we're going to determine this and we are going to present this to you all for you all to love. I don't think it's that way anymore. So it's going to take internally an organizational structure that can meet those needs. Certainly Kidzu has a long way to go in terms of inclusion and equity and being reflective of the community it serves. We know that, but I think we all know that as an industry, and I think we're going to be working, collectively on strengthening the museum industry's place in really being for everyone and walking the walk and talking the talk.
Yep. Okay. Any other visionaries on the panel that would like to share your vision of the museum workforce in 5 years?
Rita, with the Perot Museum of Nature and Science, our value, our vision and our mission is inspiring minds in nature and science. And so that's all minds. And so aligning with what Lisa has said, in 5 years, the vision is that we're impacting all of the various communities that we serve in such a way that those communities are intricately and intimately involved in everything that we do within the museum. Today, as we begin to look, I think that there are communities who perhaps see the museum and do not see it as a destination point for them for their own reasons. And it's not the desire for Perot that would be that way. And so it requires us being in discussions, going into communities that perhaps we're not in today, and having discussions around STEM and education and other environment and things that we do. We have a community partnership program that allow individuals who otherwise don't have an opportunity for membership to have memberships at Perot. And so as we do that, then it extends our ability through those partners for individuals who otherwise haven't looked at the Perot Museum as a place for a career to begin thinking about a career. And as a result, 5 years from now, there would be unsolicited pipelines of candidates applying that look like the communities that we serve, and that we're able to hire individuals, enter into partnerships, contract work, all of the above, and that we are working together to achieve our mission. It's doable, it's workable, and it's really just begins with just stating that as the purpose, aligning with other individuals who see the possibilities of that occurring. But it's also helping individuals to understand as they are applying for the work at the museum, that it may mean mutually changing our perspectives and changing what's in play. It is the mission that we have. And so I think, as I would share to anyone coming aboard, while I may have my dreams and goals, I have to make sure they align to where the museum is going and look at what I'm able to do to help the museum achieve that particular goal. And I think as we mutually do that, you'll begin to see change.
That, there's something in there that I love how you all tie together. You'd think we had, 20 hours of rehearsal. We didn't. We met for like 45 minutes the other day. But, Lisa has said a few times about this fluidity. And so what I'm hearing, it's not just opening the doors or I don't know, floodgates, no, bad analogy, but opening the doors to the museum or to the community. It's like the community coming in. And you're so right, Art, and I've seen this in my time in the museum world, is that getting that just balance or blend of the museum staff and the community just mirroring each other it's really tough to do. And I'm really hoping that the various upheavals of the past year are laying some groundwork for that to happen. I want to leave time for, I have one more question, and then we'll go try to do a little Q&A and a little bit of wrap here, but I have one question that I'm going to ask each of you to answer. And this is a question, it started out as a pretty typical, what advice do you have for, people question, but I'm going to be a little bit more pointed. How can people, individuals, especially those who've been out of work for months or a year or more, compete to get back into the museum field? And I think that a lot of we've talked about, the answers are in there, but if you had to sum it up and say a minute, how can individuals successfully compete for whatever job openings are happening now, in the next few months, and in the next year, as they want to re-enter the museum world? And I don't know who wants to go first. Somebody raise a hand.
I'll do my best, Rita.
Okay, Chuck.
So I think, how can individuals compete to get back into the museum field? I would say, number one, keep coming back to this conversation we've had about passion for the mission and flexibility. Find ways to highlight that in your cover letter, in your conversations with hiring managers, in your conversations with the references you give before they get the call, so that when the person who's calling them talks to your reference, they can bring up these ideas of flexibility and passion. I think that for sure. I think don't give short shrift to the skills that you have developed by responding to whatever might have happened in your life during the pandemic. A lot of us learned some new skills as we were dealing with, schooling from home. And, if you had to go from a 2-income budget to a 1-income budget, you've now got finance experience that you can play up as you're going in. There are a lot of things that you can talk about that just because there's a gap in the resume of time worked does not mean that you weren't still learning things. Highlight the fact that you've been attending things like these museum expert webinars, so that you can say you've been committed to your own professional development even while you were searching for a job. I think all of those help. I think the other thing, which was kind of my answer to your last question about the future of the museum field that I think is worth pointing out, and I think it ties into something that came up in the chat 20 or 30 comments ago, is when you were asking us what are the skills that you're looking for in a new candidate, not a single one of us said a master's degree in museum studies. You know, play up the skills you do have. If you studied psychology, you're great at working with people. You know, if you studied business, you've got some business acumen that you can bring. If you studied art, you know about taking passion and translating it into some other form. There are a lot of things that you can talk about your personal skill set that can tie into passion for the mission of whatever organization it is you're trying to get a job at. So I think those are my answers to what a candidate can do to make themselves stand out when they're applying.
That's great. Okay, I'm going to go back to my alphabetical list. So Horatio.
I think Chuck summarized pretty good, and I think I would just echo what you said. I think one of the things as we go through looking at resumes, it's definitely let's focus on some of the academic stuff and more about your passions and the things you've done, especially in the community. We are a community-based organization, so it's important to show what you've done in the community and what you feel about the what's happening in your community. I think often we get too caught up in some of the job histories rather than this is where I'm at right now. What the person you were maybe 10 years ago, you're maybe a whole different new person right now. So it's let's focus on the history rather where you're at right now. And also in the context of what you do in the community, what you think about the community. So it's good to tie that into the place you're applying for. So I would just add that to that point.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Horatio. So Art, how can people successfully compete for museum jobs?
What I would share, and that there's not a one size fits all. And so each individual may have a different approach, but I would share that just as a cautionary advice, not to lock yourself in on what that I am X and fill in the blank. I'm a human resources person. I am this. I think that if you're open to the possibilities again, as to what your skill sets are and what the needs are for the museum, what's the value that you can provide. I think when you lock yourself in either at a price point, a salary, or a role, that it then will limit the number of potential possibilities for you and it will lengthen your search. But if you open up to the possibilities of how I can add value, then what you may find is that your transition may be it may be a lateral move that ultimately will lead itself to a career trajectory that's upward. You may have, and this may not sound welcoming, you may want to take a step back to get on a different track that will allow you to accelerate faster. So I think it's being open to the potential possibilities of what's ahead of you in that particular environment at that particular museum. And I think it was Jeff who said it earlier, it may have been Chuck that said, if you had a person in front of you who showed that they had a desire, a passion, and a willingness to do the things that were going to help the museum, that you would just be behind that individual and supporting them in their efforts to come aboard in the organization. So I hope that resonates, that if you can just determine what it is that you have that add value and you can understand what the needs of the museum are, focus on that.
Yeah, that's great. Open to the potential. What a great phrase.
Mm-hmm.
That's a sticky note too. So Lisa, how do you think people can be successfully competitive for museum jobs?
I can't add too much more to what's already been said. The gentlemen have summed it up wonderfully. I will just echo what Chuck had said at the beginning of this, I believe, about maybe not limiting yourself or not narrowing your thoughts about a particular kind of museum or a particular facet of the museum field. I think, again, coming out of COVID, I think has opened up great possibilities, and everyone is on the precipice of reinventing themselves in some way at some level. So this is a wonderful time to be able to jump in and say, these are my passions. This is my these are my skills. This is how I can help meet the mission. I mean, you can help, you know, reestablish, an organization. You can help reinvent it. You can, this is actually a great time, because we're all struggling with how do we realign? How do we reorganize ourselves in order to be, a little more stealth, a little more conservative in maybe our resources, human and financial. Just as let me know about your personal interest. You have a personal skill, that could help us. It's not, unfortunately, everyone that's investing in, a lot of time and finances and getting their master's in museum studies, it's a wonderful thing, but it's not necessarily the primary driver of what's going to make you look attractive to an employer. It's really about that passion. And again, that willingness and openness and flexibility, and a real understanding and a real interest in the museum's mission.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. Everybody's reinventing themselves. It is a new world. So Jeff, post-COVID world, what do you have to say to people who want to be competitive for museum jobs?
So everybody has have touched on this theme, and I'll emphasize as well. And I'll quote or paraphrase, maybe at best, a former president who said, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. That applies for our organizations. As a candidate, as you approach an organization, ask that question: what can I do for this organization? And then what everybody else, all the other panelists have mentioned and talked about, was that what you can do for them is you have this set of skills that you have. Some of it's formal, some of it comes from your education. A lot of it really comes from your experience. And that experience includes the time that you've spent over this last year, whatever you've been doing in this last year. One of the things that makes a candidate attractive is that in spite of what's been happening to them in their personal experience, like in the last year, whether they're employed or not employed, were they still in the game? And by that, I mean, were they still interested in the things that they're applying for now? Or is this just now, an opportunity to go get another job, and job market's opening? No, I want to know that you want to work specifically for the organization that you're applying for, and what you can do for that, this organization. And so bring that to the table, and be willing to think outside the box, what that means. And what that means to be, and I'm calling it in the game, but what it means to be somebody who wants to be in this profession. Why do you want to be in this profession? Bring that to the table. Let me know, because that's exciting to me. I'm not hiring a skill set. I'm hiring an individual that brings a skill set to the table. And so I'm nuancing it. I really am hiring an individual with a skill set, not just a skill set. And so bring both of that. Bring that to the table, and let me know why you're excited, and what you've been doing to keep that excitement and that passion alive. And it may not be directly related to the field, because with the pandemic, you may have been laid off or furloughed, or any number of those things, and so you couldn't be working directly in the field. But what were you doing anyway? And in spite of that, and how does that relate to what we're looking for?
Yeah, that's great. That's great. And I love that, what can you do for the organization? And we've heard so much about community, and it's like, what can you do for the community, and why do you want to do it through this organization and the mission? So I think that just all sort of just pulls together in just really, really meaningful ways. So thank you for that. I want to go next, have a little time for some Q&A. So we have a museumexpert.org team member, Tamara Schwartz, who has been monitoring the chat box. I've been glancing, but I haven't had much of a chance to see what's there. So I'm going to ask Tamara if there is a question or two that maybe hasn't been addressed yet and could be useful as we come to the last bit of this particular event. Tamara?
Yes, thank you. I am going to try to wrap several questions into one, because we had quite a flurry of questions and comments earlier in the discussion related to compensation and staff expectations and other sort of related issues. And so there's been a lot of focus on, what individuals who are job seeking can do to make themselves competitive. And I'd like to sort of turn that around and ask you all to share a little bit about, what you're doing to make your organizations competitive in the job market, and, to how you're addressing not only things like compensation, but also concerns that staff may have around potential breaches of trust due to the layoffs, loss of institutional knowledge. How are you making sure that managers are being fair and respectful to staff, in this time where everyone is still dealing with a lot of uncertainty, financial strain, et cetera.
That's a lot for a few. But important, incredibly important. And I think threads of that have been throughout this, but these are the things. Transitions are difficult. It's a difficult time. So does anyone want to tackle that, or I can call on someone?
I'll start, Rita.
All right, thank you.
So one of the things relative to compensation, I think one of the things that we've done at Perot, and that I am actually in the midst of now, is to looking at competitive analysis of our pay, looking at market, looking at what we're paying internally, doing surveys with our employees from front level staff to top of the organization, and really working toward putting together a process that helps individuals to understand where their pay is. To the extent that individuals believe that the market has changed and they're outside of the market, I want to be able to have total reward, if you will, compensation conversations to help our employees understand where they are relative to internal equity and where they are relative to the external marketplace, but also help them to understand what our goal is to be competitive within pay, but to be competitive with the total process, helping connect the dots with our benefits and what they mean to the bottom line. So that's one. The other part of that question from Tamara, which I really appreciate, is so important, is really focusing on developing managers. If you manage people, if you manage individuals, make sure that you have the skill sets, the ability, the knowledge that you need to be able to take care of those individuals who are our number one asset. So I think that when our employees see that the individual whom they're reporting to is skilled and well-trained and capable, they feel that the organization cares about them. And then lastly, we're engaging with our employees. We are conducting surveys, we're getting their feedback, we're helping them to see that when we're making decisions, it's not just at a knee jerk, but that you've said this, and organizationally, the museum has done that. And so that's going to be a continual process that at the end of the day, that our employees recognize. When I talked about voices being heard, that we're going to give them every opportunity to weigh in and share their voice so that we can act in the best interest.
That is great. That's great. We only have about another minute before we go to our very last segment. Does anyone have anything they'd like to add to that? I see no hands raising. All right. Well, Art, I think you spoke so well that you have big shoes and no one's going to follow. So we're going to move on here. We just have about 5 minutes left, and I want to take a moment to introduce Walter Stavelov. I know many of you know him. He is the founder of museumexpert.org, and he is going to take just a few minutes to say a little bit about the organization and what's next.
Thank you, Rita, and thank you to the speakers. I know that you will thank everybody later on, but I want to take this opportunity personally to thank the speakers that stepped up to the plate here and keep us at Museum Expert providing high-level conversations about all these topics that we are so concerned about, and the future of work in museums, and how our members can look forward to these meetings to find how to adapt to make sure that they are competitive, because that's the thing for us. How can we help our members at Museum Expert to stay in the field or to use their skills in other places based on this kind of information? So thank you for that conversation, everybody, and thanks to the team of Museum Expert as well. I want to say Tamara, of course, and you, Rita, but all the others behind the scenes who are working on to make this happen. So we have heard, of course, about all the changes happened in museums because of the COVID, but COVID was not alone. We have seen other things happening over the last year. We have seen the Black Lives Matter movement happening. And so when we speak about change and the future of workforce, I always bring these two things together in the sense that the COVID has been dramatic, but Black Lives Matter has also raised a number of issues about working in museums as well. And so the natural and the logical follow-up on this webinar and the one before that for us is to focus directly on what we have called so far with the working title of inclusive hiring. How are we going to make sure, and this has been addressed somehow in the conversation to some aspect, Horatio has said it, but others as well. How are we making sure that museums will hire respecting equity and inclusion? How are you going to hire people from the communities around you? How are you going to do that differently to make sure that you address them, that they know that you are doing this? It's a very difficult topic. We are very well aware of that. And we are preparing that conversation very carefully with communities to make sure that to bring something, because we said you have to be relevant to your community, and the first thing is you have to reflect your community, and reflecting your community is having a diverse staff. Well, how do you get there? We have a lot of people who have promised they will do that, and I believe they will, but there are a number of obstacles between now and that process. So what are these obstacles? How can we overcome them? What kind of direct recommendations can we give to people in museums that are going to hire to do that right? And not only while you do that, how do you change the culture in your institution so that once you have hired these people, they really can thrive, that they can make a career there? That's even important and I think that Art said that somehow, but you all said it. And so, but we want to focus on that because really we are sensitive to that, to take this opportunity to look back on the last year, to take the lessons from the last year and turn that into a very concrete, practical session to support people from communities to become staff members in museums. And so look forward to that coming. And so you will be informed, of course, in time, but that's our next one. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Walter. And again, we'd like to invite everyone here to keep an eye open for upcoming webinars and other virtual events through museumexpert.org. And one final thank you to our panelists. This was a great discussion. We could have gone on, but we'll let you go for now. And a special thank you to Tamara for keeping us on track technically. And have a great day and hope to see you soon.
Thank you, everybody.